And so I want to talk a little bit about, I want to circle back, but I want to talk a little bit about the physical effects before
Sure.
we kind of dig deeper into the post-abortion emotional trauma
Mm-hmm.
that you may have experienced or may not have experienced. But like physically, what was the
Mm-hmm.
process like? Because, like you said, I think sometimes people think that the way technology has moved forward, that it's like something you slip in between your mani petty and, eyebrow, girl, you want this person,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's just something like physically. Was it demanding on your body physically to go through the process? What was that process like
Mm-hmm.
for the physical part of the abortion?
Sure. I mean, so again, everyone's different and it really does depend where you are in your pregnancy. So, and I forget the technical term of like what I ended up having, but there's the at-home method, which some people have done where you take the pills and it's basically kind of, it's essentially like forcing your body to have a miscarriage in a sense.
Mm.
So there's that option. What I did, and I forget what I actually, well, the name of it, but I actually went in for a procedure. And they basically, so there was no physical prep, I guess, to answer that first question. And more so, it's just kind of like, here's what you'll be going through. Um, and what I opted for was an option where basically it's a suction removal kind of. So for me, it really was just kind of them laying you down, prepping you for it, explaining what's going to happen. You are next to a machine, I guess, where you're kind of hearing like a suction and the whizzing and things like that. And again, I don't know how everyone else's experience was. I've heard with some women, you actually can get anesthesia where they pretty much knock you out and, you go to sleep. I didn't have that. And so being aware of what was going on, again, at the time, I'm thinking, I'm doing this decision. It's okay. My biggest thing I kept telling myself is don't look at the machine because it is a clear tube. And obviously, when you see what's going through the tube, you know what it is. So I just kind of told myself, just look up at the ceiling, look at other things, think about one of the shows you have coming up. Think about things that kind of check you out of this moment because you know what's happening and you don't want to look at it. And for me, I'm a very visual person. So this is why even doing it in another state, I don't want to do it in Atlanta because I'm thinking Atlanta is home. I have positive memories here. So we're gonna do this somewhere else that I never plan on visiting anyway. So that procedure was done. They let me know, hey, that we're finished. And basically they say that like afterwards you might have a little bit of bleeding, so they do give you pads and things like that, or panty liners, give you a couple of pamphlets. For me, they did have a waiting room just to kind of sit and basically answer any questions that I had. And for me, I was still in that space of maybe what was shock at the moment, but really for me at that time was more so, okay, you did it, and that probably would have come off extremely insensitive to anybody that was there. But at the time, I just really kind of thought, okay, just check yourself out and kind of, like you said, get unpregnant as quick as possible. So we're just going to go back to life as if anything happened. So I did have a little bit of bleeding afterwards, but even then, stuff kind of hits me late in general. So at that time, at the end of the week, at the end of that appointment, I thought I did this, hop on the road, go back to Atlanta. You'll be good. Check your panty liner, make sure you're okay. And like, you'll be fine by Monday. So that's the only physical prep I had where I just thought, you made this decision. You're okay. Panty line is all right. You're good.
Girl, you
So
are a
that pretty much is
G.
it.
You are a G. Because I'm like sitting here like, oh my God.
It's, and I was thinking, how much
I
detail do
wish
I
I was
give?
there to hold your hand or something. Like, so I
That's the only
remember
regret I have. It's the only
is
regret I have that I did it by myself. When I did confide into some people that were close to me, I remember their reactions being like, Tiffany, why didn't you tell me? You don't need
yeah.
to go through that by yourself. And that's when at that time it did start to hit me. But at the time I just kind of thought, maybe again just that adrenaline that comes from using that sports analogy of kind of like, I've got the energy, I'm doing the right thing, go for it. Not go for it, but just get this done and you'll be okay. That's my only regret I think I have
Mm,
of it, is not my decision, but that I did it by myself. And that's the only thing I would tell somebody else, because
mm,
even if you turn out to be okay, then you're okay with your friends. If you're not okay, then you've got that security, you've got that support system to
yeah.
catch you when you're not. I walked into this completely by myself by choice, but it still was under, I think, kind of a mystic hope of just like, oh, this is a decision. You'll be okay. I was treating it like it was a hair appointment.
girl, like I said, you handled that with more grace than I think most could honestly say they could muster under the circumstances.
Mhm.
I haven't really shared this a lot or really like a whole lot at all, but last year I got some really awful news that I had some early stage cancer cells in my cervix,
Mm.
and I had to have part of my cervix removed in order to get rid of those cells. And I found out the day of my surgery that my insurance wasn't going to pay for me to have general anesthesia, and I was only going to get local. So I was awake for the whole thing. And I was a mess. And like hearing you tell your story, like brought me back to laying on that table, and like you can hear the machines whirring because they use like lasers
Right.
and things to make the incisions, and so I could hear the things. And my doctor is like down there like making comments like, oh my God, like, what are you? I'm awake. I can hear you. But it's just like, oh my
Right.
gosh, like I
Bedside
would,
manner, folks.
girl, like I wish my resident were here. Like this is a perfect sample of, yes, girl, this is what she's saying, of what abnormal cell whatever should look like. And I'm like, girl. And my doctor's a Black woman, but having to sit there, right, be
Mhm.
fully awake, hear the commentary, hear the machines whirring around, and then feel it, right? Like anesthesia doesn't numb everything. It
Right.
takes away, I think, the worst of the pain, but like I could feel every time the laser cut me. And
Mm.
it was traumatic. It was traumatic. Like physical pain aside, emotionally, like that was very difficult. And I went to therapy afterwards. Like I wasn't sure how I was going to be. Luckily, my sister came to town and she was there with me, and my boyfriend at the time was there, so I was so grateful I had that support system, but I still didn't know emotionally how I was going to be after that. you know and
Right.
so for you, after having that experience, I know you felt like you were going to be okay emotionally, but were you?
Girl, no, no. And you hit it on the head. That's the type of stuff that needs to be in the pamphlets. I don't need to know about if I'm bleeding a little bit. I mean, that's great because I know who to call. But let me know if you're feeling like this, like that. Like, they don't even talk about the feelings because there are some women that go through this, and whether it's they don't have a connection to the person maybe that got them pregnant or the situation, or even just the idea of being, whatever the reason is, everyone handles it different. But no, for that very reason, that's the part which, I would have been a little bit more honest with myself, like, hey, okay, these are triggers can be anything. So the first thing that you mentioned, again, I'm so sorry to hear about that. And you talk about me being
It's
a
like
G girl, I didn't even know. And like she said, y'all, close friend, but she's a boss lady handling her business. So,
girl, it's just
but
like everybody handles things differently, and my way of
very
handling
true.
is to just power through. Like I'm getting up, I'm going to work, like I'm gonna just power through
Yeah.
it. And that's how I kind of got through it. But I also had to go to therapy. I was like, I need to talk to somebody about this, you know what I mean? And so everybody got to get through it the best way they know how, and that's just how I handle things, good, bad, or ugly. It may not be
No, and
right.
that's very true. But here's the thing, you do what you need to do, right? And again, and I think sometimes even that is tied into just Black culture, how we deal with
Mm,
things. I think if you aren't kind of really taught maybe some of the skills in terms of other than power through, whether that be a feminine thing or a Black feminine thing, either way, it's something that just comes second nature to us. So similarly to yourself, I'm thinking power through because I've got things to do. I've got a show, I've got this, and the third. But it was little things that started to hit me that I realized, okay, wait a minute, you're not okay. So there were obvious things that I kind of prepared myself for. If I see a cute little, baby face, or if I
mm,
see, change
mm,
the channel, Toys R Us comes on, all the obvious things, right? But it was little things like hearing a vacuum cleaner. I could not understand what was
mm,
happening because I would freak out to a point where I would start crying. And I eventually had to realize,
mm.
okay, wait a minute, you're having a panic attack from
Oof.
Hoover. like, and I didn't realize what that was. So if I had to, and I think that's why I dare I say enjoy being so transparent about my experience, because I'm thinking how much easier would my healing have been if I had been aware that you might go through some things. First up, that you can have PTSD from this decision, despite
Mm,
you having the best intentions, having thought everything out. And well, I don't necessarily consider myself a planner. I will literally list out things and prep myself for A, B, and C, but life always hits you with X, Y, and Z.
yep.
That is the part that had me thinking, okay, Tiffany, if you had just kind of opened yourself up to, using the analogy of an alphabet, all of these letters possibly hitting you at one time or one at a random time, instead of thinking, okay, I'm just going to focus right here. That's not what happened. So there were little triggers that started to hit me, and I had no clue where that was coming from. And it definitely was and still is a journey, but it's a lot easier now than it was 3 years ago.
Yeah. That vacuum,
Yeah,
that's heavy. Mm.
that was one that just kind of, I didn't really know what it was. And then, I don't know about you. I know for me though, I have a hard time identifying my own, what I feel like are weaknesses. And then even just the
Mm.
concept of something making me weak, even if it's myself, it's like, hold up, wait a minute, self, have a conversation, because we are strong, we are this, you go through all the things that define you. And even when that's not enough to kind of help you combat maybe these things that you're unaware of, it's kind of like, okay, what is going on? So for me, it was a heavy time. Like the rest of 2018, just for myself, was just hard because it was vacuum cleaners, or having a hard time sleeping because I was having dreams of my child. And the thing that I experienced, that I
Mm.
don't know if this is a technical term, but it almost was like a phantom pregnancy. So,
Mm.
and I don't know again if that's the correct term, but it was this feeling of, while I wasn't pregnant, I still felt like I was preparing for what would have been my delivery month, which would have
Ooh.
been October or so. So there were things that were still kind of like, okay, I know I'm not pregnant, but I still am in countdown mode to when this baby would be here. So it just, it was a weird space because it just felt like my mind was very reactive to things. And I had no understanding of where it was coming from. And I felt pretty self aware. I was like, I know me. I know what I like. I know what I don't like,
Mm.
but I don't know
But
why
this is
this is
different. This is
happening.
different, Tiffany.
Exactly.
This is post-trauma Tiffany.
Exactly.
That's a different Tiffany. And you
Exactly.
have to, one thing I did hear you say is that you're like being so hard on yourself. Like you have to, in those
Yeah.
moments, give yourself grace as well, because you don't know what you
Yeah.
don't know. You've never been in this experience before. Like, how could you know that this would be a potential result
Right.
or emotional consequence of having this done? Like you said, the pamphlet didn't say so. Like, how could you possibly have known? And so you have to give
Right.
yourself grace. And while I haven't experienced an abortion, I've experienced trauma. And I think that the most important thing to recognize when you've been through something traumatic is you don't know what your triggers are going to be. You don't
That
know
part.
how it's going to start manifesting itself in ways like you didn't even know. Like you didn't even
Exactly.
recognize. Like I've had to have people point out to me like, why do you flinch when people touch you? And I was like, because I had experienced a sexual assault and I didn't realize I did that. Like I didn't
Right.
even realize it, right? Like cuz the same way you went back home to Atlanta and like try to forget it, like when you suppress those things, they start to manifest themselves in ways that you couldn't even possibly imagine. And then
The mind.
things that used to be mundane are triggers for you. And I've had like my ex, he would be like, "Why did, me saying X make you so upset?" And I'm like, now that I've had an opportunity to go through therapy and, heal, I'm like, that is a trigger for me. And so for people who are trying to help people who've been through a trauma, if somebody who says, or somebody who's been through something tells you something's a trigger for them, even if you don't understand what that means, like, don't do it again. Like, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it is seriously traumatic. That person is
Right.
reliving the trauma every time you do that. And so he just didn't understand. And he was like, why is it such a big deal? Like, I'm telling you, this is a trigger for me. This is going to be a
Right.
big deal for me every time. And he just couldn't conceptualize why something so small was
Had such a large
emotionally,
reaction.
yeah, taxing for me.
Mhm.
And so to hear you recount your experience with the vacuum, and, it's just like, as a person who has also experienced trauma, I can relate
Right.
to that on so many levels, because you just never know what your life is going to look like on the other side of the trauma, or who you're going to be on the other side, even once you've healed. Even once you
That
healed, it's
part.
like when you drop a coffee cup and you try to put it back together, and it looks like a coffee cup, but it's got all these cracks and fractures, right? Like,
Now it's a mosaic. Mhm.
right. It'll never
Mhm.
be the exact same version of that coffee cup again,
Right.
good or bad. Like, sometimes that's good, right? Like, sometimes you grow from that, and it molds you into the person you're supposed to be. And some parts of it, are not so good. And maybe you'll never be as confident, or, as self-assured in some areas as you once were. And so it's just, the other side of trauma is, whew, it's a mysterious place, honey.